The rope sang through the air like a live thing, and Benjamin Chandler heard the sharp crack of it settling before he even saw the woman who had thrown it. He was flat on his back in the heather, the moorland sky wheeling overhead in a dizzy gray smear, every bone in his body ringing from the fall. Sable, his black stallion, had spooked at something out of the mist, a standing stone, a shadow, the screech of a moorland hawk, and launched him clean over its head without ceremony or warning. 16 hands of panicked horse galloping across open moorland, Benjamin's good saddle bouncing empty on its back, and he lying in the wet heather trying to decide if anything was broken. He heard hoofbeats slowing, then the sound of boots in the heather, steady, unhurried. A shadow fell over him. He squinted up. The woman standing over him was tall, broad-shouldered, and entirely composed. She wore close-fitted travel leathers dyed the color of dark pine, the bodice laced snug across a figure that was powerfully built and unapologetically feminine in equal measure. Her breeches were tucked into knee-high riding boots, and a short open vest of tanned hide sat over the bodice, unbuttoned from throat to waist, the edges stitched with thin copper rings. Her arms were bare below the vest's short sleeves, and those arms were corded with muscle. A hunting knife rode her left hip. A coil of good rope, the rope she had just thrown, was already being gathered back through her fingers with practiced ease. She was an orc, green-skinned, jaw set square and strong lower canines just slightly prominent beneath her lip. Her hair was the color of midnight, thick and unbound, falling past her shoulders in a way that the moorland wind was doing its best to improve. Her eyes, when they found his, were an unexpected amber, not gold exactly, more like firelight caught in old glass, and they swept over him from boot to crown with an expression that was neither alarmed nor particularly impressed. She looked him over slowly, not with cruelty, not with dismissal, with the thorough, unhurried appraisal of someone who had learned that first impressions, when ignored, got you killed. "You have a leg that went sideways," she said. Her voice was low, accented with the rolling lilt of the Western clans, but clear. Not broken, strained at the knee from the look of it. "I know," Benjamin said, because he did. He also knew his pride had taken the worst injury of the morning, and he was not sure he would be mentioning that. "Your horse is stopped." She nodded at something past his line of sight. "My rope. He is large and ill-tempered, and was about to disappear into the Dunfell mist, which means you would have walked back to the Ashgate Road on that knee." Benjamin pushed himself up onto his elbows. He was a lean, weather-seamed man of 32, dark-haired and brown-eyed, with the kind of face that was quietly good-looking in a way that tended to get overlooked next to louder men. He wore a bounty hunter's working clothes, a long oilskin coat, a leather vest over a wool shirt, good boots, a crossbow slung across his back, and a short sword on his hip. The coat was now plastered with heather. He was aware he did not cut an impressive figure. Sable stood about 20 feet away, the rope looped around his neck, his sides heaving but his feet planted. He was eyeing the woman with the expression of a horse who had just met something he was less sure about than the standing stone. "How did you throw that in the mist?" Benjamin asked. "Practice," she said, and reached down to offer her hand. He took it. She pulled him upright as though he weighed nothing, one clean motion, and then let go the moment he had his balance, stepping back to give him room. He tested the knee. She was right, strained, not broken. He could walk barely and not fast. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. She had already turned to walk toward Sable. She approached the stallion slowly, one hand extended, speaking something low that Benjamin could not quite hear but which had the rhythm of a horse charm, some old clan thing. Words in the orc tongue, soft and steady. Sable's ears flicked. His nostrils widened. After a moment his head came down, and the woman laid her palm flat against his nose and let him breathe her scent. Benjamin watched, and something happened in his chest that had nothing to do with the fall. She brought the horse to him, transferred the lead rope to his hand, and then stood back. Not deferential, just finished with one task and waiting to see if there was another. "Beulah Rageborn," she said, and it sounded like an offering of information rather than a greeting. "Benjamin Chandler," he paused. Are you crofting out here? I did not see a holding in this stretch. No, she watched him struggle to shorten the stirrup on his bad side so he could mount more easily, and she did not offer to help, which he found he respected. I am traveling. The Ashgate Road washed out 3 miles east. I came over the moss. So did I. He got a foot in the stirrup and swung up, biting down the hiss when the knee complained. Where are you headed? She looked at him again with that slow amber gaze. Considering. Dunport, she said at last. You. Same. He settled in the saddle and looked down at her. She had no horse that he could see. No pack either, though she had a good-sized satchel over one shoulder. The moss is 4 miles across and you are on foot. I have been on foot before. In the Dunfell mist, he glanced at the gray wall of vapor sitting 20 yards to the north, where the standing stones rose out of it like broken teeth. The Dunfell Moor was the kind of place that swallowed travelers whole, not because of any magic exactly, but because its landmarks were absent and its ground could go from solid to swamp in 3 steps, and its mist had a way of arriving between one breath and the next. You know it. Somewhat. I know it well. 14 crossings in 4 years. He paused. He was not entirely sure why he was prolonging this conversation, except that the woman had caught his horse out of a flat run with one throw of a rope in heavy mist, and she had looked at him like she was reading something she had not decided the meaning of yet, and he found he wanted very much to know what she concluded. I could take you to Dunport. Her chin lifted a fraction. I do not need carrying. No, he agreed. But Sable can take double weight easily. The road is long, your boots are already wet, and you just saved me a 4-mile crawl. That seems like a fair trade. A silence. The mist moved at the edges. Somewhere in it a stone chat called and fell quiet. All right, Beulah Rageborn said. She came around to Sable's left, put one hand on the cantle, and swung up behind the saddle with the same clean economy she had used for everything else. She did not grab for him to steady herself. She sat straight, hands resting on her own knees, a precise 6 inches of space between her chest and his back. They rode into the mist. The Dunfell was not a place that encouraged idle conversation, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who knew how to be watchful. Benjamin navigated by the standing stones, by the sound of the hidden stream to the east, by the way the heather gave way to paler sedge grass at the soft spots. He talked to Sable sometimes in a low murmur, not because the horse needed it, but because it helped him track the animal's tension. If something was coming through the mist that Benjamin could not yet see, Sable would know first. After 20 minutes, Beulah said, "You are a bounty hunter. What gave it away?" "The crossbow, the carry papers in your coat pocket. I can see the edge of them and the way you are scanning the mist. Not for hazards, for a specific shape." He considered lying, decided against it. "Yes." "What are you hunting in the Dunfell?" "Someone who owes a trader in Ashgate a considerable debt and chose to leave rapidly rather than pay it." He guided Sable around a dark patch of ground. "Not violent work, just recovery of goods yourself. I am not hunting anything. You had a rope coiled and ready in the open moor." "I always have a rope coiled and ready." He absorbed this. "Fair." Another silence. He was very aware of her behind him, the warmth of her even at that careful distance. She rode well. Sable had accepted her presence with unusual ease, which Benjamin, who loved his horse and trusted his horse's judgment, considered informative. "How long have you been out of the Western clans?" he asked. A pause, not hostile, thoughtful. 5 years, she said. "Since Garred died, your husband." "Yes, I am sorry." "He was a good man," she said, and there was something in her voice that was entirely closed, not because she wanted to shut the conversation down, but because she had finished her grieving years ago and was describing a fact. "He was a crofter east of the clan lands. We had 8 good years. Then the marsh fever took him. His family did not want the holding to pass to an orc widow, so I left." Benjamin wanted to say several things about that. He chose the one that was most accurate. That was wrong of them. "It was common," she said. "Common is not always right." "No," he agreed. "It is not." They came out of the mist at the edge of the higher ground where the moorland fell away into the long valley and Dunport sat in the crook of the river below, gray-slated and smoke-hazed and ordinary. Benjamin pulled Sable to a halt and they looked at it together for a moment. "You said you knew the Dunfell Mist," she said. "I do." "Then you also know the Greystone Road cuts 2 hours off the descent and avoids the ferry toll." He turned his head. She was looking at the valley with a completely composed expression. "I do know that," he said. "How do you?" "I crofted 18 miles north of here for 3 years after I left the western lands." She slid down from Sable's back before he could offer to help and landed lightly. "Thank you for the ride. And for the conversation." She started walking toward the path that led down to the Greystone Road. He sat on Sable and watched her go, and he became aware, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not want her to walk away. Not because she had caught his horse, although she had, and not because she was striking, although she undeniably was, but because in 40 minutes of traveling together in difficult terrain she had been competent and honest and unexpectedly dry in a way he had not expected, and the moorland felt emptier the moment she was 10 yards away. "Beulah," he said. She stopped, turned. "I have rooms already paid at the Dunport Inn," he said. "2 of them. I always take 2 on long hunts, 1 for working, 1 for sleeping." He was explaining too much. He knew it and kept going. "The second one is empty and costs nothing more. And in the morning, if you are continuing south, the road to the coast passes near where my quarry was last seen, and I could use someone who can read a trail." She studied him. That amber gaze, slow and complete. "You are offering me a room," she said, "because you need a tracker." "I am offering you a room because you saved my horse and very possibly my knee," he said. "The tracker part is separate and would be paid work if you want it." Another long moment. The valley wind moved her dark hair across her face and she did not bother to push it back. "One condition," she said. "Name it." "I carry my own weight. You do not make decisions for me. You do not speak for me to townspeople. If something needs saying, I say it myself." "Done," he said immediately. Something shifted in her face, not softness exactly. More like a door opening just a crack on a very interior room. She turned back toward the path. "Then let us go," she said. "The Greystone Road is faster." Dunport was a border town, and border towns had the same mood the world over, half suspicious and half hungry, taking in travelers with one hand and checking their pockets with the other. It had a market square paved with uneven stone, 2 taverns, a blacksmith, a chandler's shop that smelled of tallow and river weed, and an inn called the Two-Bridge that was clean enough and warm enough to suit a working man. They drew looks walking in. Benjamin was used to looks. A bounty hunter's coat with a crossbow on his back made people notice him. But the looks for Beulah were different, and he noticed them noticing her. The way eyes slid sideways and conversations dipped, and he felt something harden quietly in his chest. She noticed it too, he was sure of that, but she walked through it the way she walked through mist, head level, pace measured, giving the looks nothing to catch hold of. The innkeeper was a wide woman named Merritt who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing for at least 2 decades. She took Benjamin's coin, handed him 2 keys, and looked at Beulah with a flat professional assessment. "You will need to stable the horse separately," Merritt said to Benjamin. "And you're—" she paused. "My associate," Benjamin said. "Associate," Merritt repeated and handed the second key directly to Beulah without further comment. Beulah's room was at the end of the hall, which suited her, she said. Benjamin's was 2 doors up. He changed his coat, splinted his knee with a strip of leather, and a straight piece of firewood that the stable boy provided without asking questions, and went down to find her already at a corner table in the tavern room, with a bowl of moorland stew in front of her, and a cup of the local dark ale that she was examining with an expression of mild scientific interest. He sat down across from her. She pushed the second bowl toward him without looking up. She had already ordered for him. "It is lamb," she said. "The bread is yesterday's, but it is still good." He sat down, he ate. It was lamb, and it was good, and the bread was only slightly stale, and across the table from him was the most self-contained and baffling and quietly compelling woman he had met in 4 years of lonely roads, and he was beginning to understand that his notion of the evening involving a quiet solitary meal had already revised itself without his permission. "Tell me about the quarry," she said. He spread his carry papers on the table between them, turning them so she could read them. Ross Hinder, a factor's agent out of Ashgate who took 3 bales of spice cloth on credit advance and then disappeared. Worth 40 marks to the factor who hired me, provided I can prove he cleared south with the goods. He tapped a point on the rough map. Last reliable sighting was at a croft called the Fen Holding, 2 miles south of town. Beulah studied the map. She had large hands, he noticed. Capable. There was a scar on her right palm that looked old. "There is a track off the southern road at the second milestone," she said. "It leads to 3 crofts, not 1. The Fen Holding is the furthest. The ground is soft approaching it, which means if someone came through with a load in a cart, they left marks. You know this ground. I told you. I crofted north of here." She looked up. "I also know that the Fen Holding is owned by an old man named Garvik who rents a room to travelers and does not ask questions about their business. If your Ross Hinder needed a place to hold up with stolen goods, Garvik's is where you would go." Benjamin looked at her across the papers and the guttering candle. "You are very useful," he said. "Yes," she agreed with no false modesty at all. "I am," he laughed. He had not been expecting to laugh, and it came out a little ragged from disuse, but it was genuine. She watched him with that amber gaze and the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth. "Tomorrow," he said. "We ride at first light." "First light," she agreed. She finished her ale, stood, and took her key. At the foot of the stairs she paused and looked back at him. In the tavern's firelight, with her dark hair loose and her copper-ringed vest catching the glow, she was arresting in a way that made the room feel smaller around him. "You laughed," she said. "I did. It sounded like you were out of practice." She went upstairs before he could respond, which was probably for the best, because he did not have an answer that was not entirely too honest for a first evening. He found Ross Hinder the next afternoon, which was almost too easy, because Beulah had been right about the cart tracks and right about Garvik's croft, and once they spotted the cloth bales stacked poorly in the barn with a tarpaulin over them that was 3 inches too short to fully conceal the color. It was a matter of showing the carry papers to old Garvik, who was not actually complicit, only incurious and waiting for Hinder to come back from wherever he had been. Hinder came back on a mule and took one look at Benjamin's coat and the crossbow, and tried to ride back the way he came. He got about 40 yards before Beulah stepped out from behind the standing stone, where she had been waiting, and held up one hand, and her expression apparently convinced Hinder that the mule was not going to be enough. It took an hour to sort the paperwork, another hour to arrange transport for the cloth bales back to Ashgate, and then they were back on the southern road with Sable walking easy under Benjamin's weight in the afternoon light. 40 marks, Beulah said from beside him. She was walking because the job was done, and she walked when she preferred to think. "What is your rate for the associate work?" He had been thinking about this. 8 marks, he said. The location of the croft, the knowledge of the ground, and the stone ambush alone were worth that. She was quiet for a moment. "That is a fair rate." "I know." He glanced down at her. "What are you actually headed to Dunport for? You never said." "The Dunport market. There is a factor there who deals in wool assessments. I have been running an independent clip assessment service for 3 years, checking wool quality for farmers who want an honest count before they take it to market. It pays. That is clever work." "It is useful work," she said. "Farmers get cheated on clip weight and quality all the time. I learned wool reading from Garrett." She paused. "He was very good at it." Benjamin turned this over. The dead husband, the stolen holding. 5 years of building something new alone in a region where she was the only orc most people had ever spoken to directly. He thought about what that kind of daily persistent strength looked like from the inside and decided he was barely qualified to imagine it. "The factor you are meeting," he said. "Is he reliable?" "He has been honest so far. though he sent a different agent to arrange this meeting, and I did not entirely like the tone of the letter. She glanced up at him. It may come to nothing. He almost said he would come with her if she wanted company at the meeting. He stopped himself. She had been very specific about not having him speak for her and said instead, "If it turns complicated and you need a witness to the terms, I am available." She looked at him sideways. "A bounty hunter as a legal witness. I have a guild license. In Dunport law, that is equal to a merchant's signature." She considered this. "I will let you know," she said. They walked and rode in the afternoon light, and the moor fell away behind them, and Dunport rose in the valley. And Benjamin found himself hoping the wool factor meeting turned complicated after all, because complicated meant she would need to stay longer. And he was not ready to watch her walk out of his life into the next job on the next road with her coil of rope and her amber eyes and her precise, uncompromising way of seeing everything exactly as it was. The wool factor meeting did not go badly exactly, but it went wrong. Benjamin was waiting in the market square buying a meat pasty from a stall and watching the pigeons argue over crusts when Beulah came out of the factor's counting house with her jaw set and her eyes hard. She told him over the pasty, standing at the edge of the square, her voice perfectly controlled. The factor had not wanted to discuss her service terms. He had wanted to discuss buying her contracts outright, which sounded reasonable until the figures appeared and made clear that what he actually wanted was to absorb her client list and her knowledge of the local wool market at a fraction of their value, and that he had assumed this was the part that had made her jaw do what it was doing, that she would be grateful for the offer, given her circumstances. "Given your circumstances," Benjamin repeated. Those were his words. What circumstances was he referring to? "Being what I am," she said, "in a market where I am apparently doing better than I should be." Benjamin ate the last of his pasty and said very calmly, "Would you like me to go back in there?" "No," she said it immediately and flatly. "I will handle it." "I know you will handle it. I'm asking if you want company." She looked at him. Something shifted in those amber eyes, not softness, but a kind of recognition, the look of someone who had been alone long enough that being genuinely offered something without an angle attached took a moment to land properly. "No," she said again, but quieter. "Not this time." She went back in. Benjamin bought a second pasty and waited in the square. Two market women nearby were watching the counting house with the particular expression of people who were enjoying something happening to someone else, and he met their gaze steadily until they found somewhere else to look. 20 minutes later, Beulah came out again. This time her face was composed rather than tight, which was different. "He will honor the existing service terms," she said. 3 more seasons." What changed his mind? I explained to him exactly how much of my client list would follow me rather than his firm if I chose to walk away, and how much of his current business in the eastern moorland district depends on my assessments having established trust with farmers who do not know his name but know mine. She took a breath. He was surprised I had numbers. "You had numbers." "I have always had numbers." He shook his head, smiling. "The next pasty is yours." Something in her face relaxed. It was brief, barely visible like ice at the edge of a spring thaw, but it was real. "Come," she said. "I need a drink. The good ale, not that riverweed thing from last night." They found the better tavern on the south side of the square. It was louder and warmer, and the ale was indeed better. And they sat at the fire, and she told him about the 3 years of building her wool assessment business from a single season with one client, old Marek on the North Moor, who had taken a chance on her because he had nothing to lose, and how she had learned to price herself precisely right, high enough to be taken seriously, and low enough that farmers in tight years could still afford her. In return, he told her about the bounty hunting, how he had started as a runner for a merchant house, spent 3 years learning roads and faces and how to read which direction a man was likely to run, how the work suited him because it had movement in it, and because he had always been better at finding things than at staying in one place, and because the loneliness of the road was at least a loneliness he controlled. "You prefer a loneliness you control," she said. He turned his cup on the table. "I suppose that is one way to put it." What happened that made you choose controlled loneliness over the other kind? He looked at her. She asked questions the way she looked at him, steadily, and with the clear implication that she was genuinely interested in the answer and would not be satisfied with a deflection. Nothing dramatic, he said. No great loss. I just spent a number of years being the kind of ordinary that other people looked past, and eventually I decided that if I was going to be on my own, I might as well be useful while I was at it. He paused. That sounds less sad than it is. It does not sound sad, she said. It sounds like someone who made the best available choice with what they had. She looked at her ale. I know what that is. He believed her completely. They stayed at the fire until the tavern thinned out, and when they walked back through the dark square to the inn, their arms nearly touched at every step, and neither of them moved away, and neither of them closed the gap, and Benjamin thought that this particular inch of air between them was one of the most charged things he had ever been aware of in his life. At the door to her room she stopped, turned. How long are you in Dunport? She asked. I report back to my guild office in 4 days. After that, the next contract starts. He held her gaze. The factor meeting is done. I have no reason to stay. She paused. Except that I do not particularly want to leave yet. He was quiet for a moment. Around them the inn creaked and settled. Down the hall someone snored. Then stay, he said. I can find work here for a few days if I ask around, and the Dunfell is easier going back in company. She searched his face. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy something. All right, she said. She opened her door and went in and closed it behind her, and Benjamin stood in the hall for a moment with his hand against the wall, reminding himself how to breathe normally. 3 days passed in the valley, and they were some of the best days Benjamin Chandler had spent in 4 years. He found work, a missing tools assessment for a local mason, small but enough to cover expenses. She had 2 farmers come to her for second opinions on clip assessments after the factor's clients heard she was in town. They worked separately during the days and came together in the evenings, comparing notes over meals, falling into the easy shorthand of 2 people who were already beginning to understand how the other's mind worked. He showed her the Greystone Arch on the valley's west side, a place where the old standing stones formed a rough gateway that the local tradition said marked the boundary between 2 kingdoms so old no one remembered their names. She stood in the archway and looked out over the moorland and told him that in the western clan lands, the old stone circles were called breath places, locations where the world had inhaled once and never quite let it all out again. He thought that was one of the most beautiful things he had heard someone say about a piece of landscape. She found him reading a legal notice pinned to the market board on the second morning, a call for witnesses in a land dispute, and watched him study it with the focused, unhappy expression of a man who had found something he did not like. What is it? She asked. Nothing relevant. He started to look away. She reached past him and read it herself. Her face went very still. The notice was a summons, not for a land dispute, for a hearing at the Dunport Town Council regarding a complaint filed by 3 merchant families against an unnamed party described as a non-human itinerant trader operating without a proper guild charter in the eastern moorland district. The date was 2 days away. They mean you, Benjamin said quietly. They mean my assessment business, she said. Do you have a charter? I have a moorland worker's certificate and a letter of reference from the Ashgate Traders Association. Her jaw was doing that tight thing again. Which is legally sufficient for an itinerant service provider below the guild threshold. I am below the threshold. The complaint is not legitimate, but the hearing is real. The hearing is real. She took the notice down from the board and rolled it precisely. The merchant families that filed this, I need to know who they are. I can find out, he said. Guild contacts. She looked at him. You would do that. Of course I would do that. She held his gaze for a moment that stretched longer than it needed to, and then she said, all right, yes, please. The merchant families were Cord, Hellaway, and Draven, the 3 largest wool brokers operating out of Dunport. And when Benjamin dug a little further, through his guild contact at the tavern who talked freely after 2 ales, He learned that all three had been losing clients to Beulah's assessment business for the past 2 years, because farmers trusted her eye and trusted her honesty, and because she charged less and was harder to bribe. He brought this back to her that evening and laid it out. "This is not about your charter," he said. "It is about market share. They want your business disrupted and your clients scared off." "I know," she said. "I knew the moment I saw the notice." She was sitting at the table in his room, which was how their evenings had shifted over 3 days, from the tavern to his room, where there was a table and candle and less noise, and where he had noticed she seemed more comfortable than in public spaces. She had the notice open in front of her and her notes beside it. "The question is how to prevent it from working." He sat across from her. "How deep are your records? Client history, quality assessments, dates, weights?" "Very deep. I keep everything." "I would like to see it." She studied him. "Why?" "Because if you walk into that council chamber with documentation of every contract, every assessment, every letter of reference, and a clear accounting of your legal standing relative to the guild threshold, and I walk in beside you as a licensed guild member who can testify as to the nature of your work and its legality, it becomes a great deal harder for three wealthy merchants to turn this into what they want it to be." She was quiet for a moment. "You said you would not speak for me." "I will not speak for you. I will speak as a witness to the business practice. You speak for yourself." He met her eyes. "What you say will be better anyway, but I can give you a floor to stand on." She considered this for a long time. Outside, the wind had picked up and the shutters on his window rattled. The candle light moved between them. "You are a very strange bounty hunter," she said at last. "So I have been told." "Why does this matter to you?" It was not quite a question. He looked at the table, then at her. "Because what they are doing is wrong. And because you worked for 3 years building something real and honest and good, and I am not interested in sitting in a tavern 2 streets away pretending I do not know that, while 3 merchants with more money than principal try to take it from you." He paused. "And because you caught my horse." The corner of her mouth moved. It was more than a ghost this time. It was real, and it made something happen in the room that he felt across the table. "Then we had better look at the records," she said, and pulled her satchel open. They worked until the candle burned low, and then he lit a second one, and they worked through that one too. By midnight they had a document case organized with the precision of a legal brief, chronological, cross-referenced, with Benjamin's guild license number as a witnessing party attached to the letter of reference from Ashgate. She drafted the statement she would give, and he listened to her read it once, and it was clear and precise and devastating in its logic, and he told her so. "It is the truth," she said. "The truth has the advantage of being consistent. Most people find it inconsistent with what they want," he said. She smiled at this fully, genuinely, the first real open smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face. Not into something softer, but into something larger, something that let all of what she was show at once, the strength and the humor and the careful, contained warmth that she kept behind good locks. He felt that smile in his sternum. She looked down at the papers and seemed to realize she had smiled, and she did not take it back, which mattered to him more than he had expected. "Sleep," she said, beginning to gather the organized case. "You look terrible. You are very kind. I am practical. You cannot testify convincingly while looking like a man who has been awake since the previous morning." He laughed, that out-of-practice laugh again, the one she had noted the first evening. She was at the door when she paused and turned, and this time it was different from the previous nights. This time she looked at him with something open in her face, something that had not been there on the moorland or in the market or even at the fire in the tavern, something that was asking something it had not fully decided to voice yet. "Benjamin," she said. "Yes. I would like you to know." She stopped, reconsidered. "Thank you for all of this." She met his eyes. "I do not thank people carelessly." "I know you do not," he said. She held his gaze for one long moment. Then she opened the door and went to her room, and Benjamin sat at his empty table for a while with the second candle burning down, turning over the particular quality of that look, the way it had sat on him like warmth, and understanding that he was already thoroughly and irreversibly in trouble. The night before the council hearing, Benjamin woke to a sound that did not belong to the inn. He was a light sleeper by profession, and this sound was the particular creak of a floorboard under deliberate weight, someone moving carefully, not the careless shuffle of an insomniac but the measured step of someone trying not to be heard. Outside his door, past his door, toward the end of the hall, toward Beulah's room. He was out of bed and at his door in 3 seconds. He cracked it, listened. A larger sound, now low voices, the sound of her door being tested, the distinct complaint of a lock being worked with something that was not a key. He pulled on his boots, grabbed the short sword from the bedpost, and went into the hall. There were 2 of them, big men in traveling clothes with the particular anonymous look of hired work. One was at her door with a pick tool, the other had his back to the hall, watching. The watcher turned when Benjamin's door opened and his hand went to his side. "Walk away," the watcher said, low and flat. "No," Benjamin said, which was not brilliant but was truthful. The door at the end of the hall opened inward. Beulah Rageborn stepped through it, not out of sleep but out of full alertness. She had been awake and listening from inside, he realized, and had let them think they were making progress with the lock because she wanted them in the corridor, out of options. She was barefoot, in a sleeping shirt, and she had her hunting knife in her left hand and the coiled rope in her right, and she looked at the man with the pick tool the way that standing stones look at weather. The man with the pick tool made a decision and went for her. She sidestepped, used the rope as a restraint rather than a weapon, a loop around one arm, a sharp pull that sat him against the wall with his arm torqued at an angle that made further ambition inadvisable, and then looked at his partner. "I suggest," she said calmly, "that you tell me who sent you." The partner looked at Benjamin with the crossbow now leveled. Looked at Beulah, who had his colleague's arm in a rope lock and was watching him with amber eyes that were doing absolutely nothing to reassure him. He made the calculation that whatever he was being paid was not enough. "Holloway," he said. "The merchant. He said to rough you up. Nothing permanent, just enough to keep you from the hearing." "I see," she said. She released the arm lock, stepped back. "Go." They went, fast. Benjamin lowered the crossbow and looked at her in the hall's dark, the candle sconce behind her casting her an amber light that matched her eyes, her dark hair loose and wild from where she had been lying still and waiting, barefoot on the cold boards with a rope and a knife and no visible fear whatsoever. "You were ready for them," he said. "I suspected something like this might happen. Holloway is the kind of man who does not separate money from action." She coiled the rope again, watching the end of the hall. "Are you all right? I did not do anything. You came into the hall with a sword," she said. "That is something." He looked at her, she looked at him. The hall was very quiet, the inn settling around them, and she was standing 3 feet from him in the flickering candlelight, and the night had that particular stripped-back quality of a near thing resolved, where all the noise falls away and what is left is purely what is real. He crossed the 3 feet without deciding to. He put one hand against the wall beside her head, not caging her. She was not a woman you caged, and he knew that just a gesture of leaning in, of being present, of closing the distance that had been exactly 1 inch for too many days. "Beulah," he said. She looked up at him. Her chin was nearly level with his jaw. She was so tall, and her eyes were a foot from his and completely clear. "I know," she said, which was not an answer but was somehow everything. She lifted one hand and laid her palm flat against his chest, the scarred right hand, the capable hand, the rope-throwing, wool-reading, horse-calming, entirely remarkable hand, and felt his heartbeat through his shirt, and her eyes closed for just a moment. And when they opened again, there was something in them so direct and wanting that he stopped breathing. He kissed her, or she kissed him. The distinction was not really applicable. It was the kind of first kiss that does not feel like a first anything. It felt like arriving somewhere after a long journey without knowing you had been traveling toward it. She kissed him back with a thoroughness that told him clearly, without ambiguity, that she had wanted this for days, and had been waiting for him to stop being careful. Her free hand found the back of his neck and held there, and the wall was solid behind him when he leaned into it, and the inn around them was dark and quiet, and everything that mattered was right here in this narrow hallway at whatever hour of night it was. When they finally pulled back, she did not remove her hand from his chest. He did not remove his from the wall beside her head. In the Western clans, she said, and her voice was lower than usual, rough at the edges in a way that did something complicated to his composure. When a woman takes a man's face in her hands, it means she is claiming him for her own. You took the back of my neck, he said. That is close enough. Her thumb traced a slow line over his sternum, feeling his heartbeat. You do not have to take it as a claim. What if I want to, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she took his hand off the wall and held it, her large scarred fingers interlaced with his, and turned toward her room. Then come inside, she said, and I will explain what else the Western clans do. He went with her, and the hall went dark and quiet, and the night wrapped itself around the inn, and whatever happened inside that room between two people who had been alone too long and had found something neither of them had expected was their own and nobody else's. And the one thing certain about it was that, when the gray moorland dawn came seeping through the shutters, nothing between them was the same as it had been. The Dunport Town Council met in a stone building off the market square, a low-ceilinged room with benches on three sides and a high seat at the end where the council chair sat, and it was not generally a place that filled up on hearing days. Most hearings were dull municipal disputes, and the Dunport citizens had better things to do. But this morning there were people standing in the back. Word had gotten out, whether from the hired men who had fled the inn, or from a market gossip, or simply from the particular way that interesting news moves in small towns, that a non-human was being hauled before the council by three powerful merchant families, and Dunport had turned up to watch. Benjamin stood at the back of the room when Beulah entered, and he watched the room watch her. She walked to the respondent's bench with her document case under her arm and her travel leathers fitted and composed, and she sat down and opened the case and arranged her papers with the measured calm of someone who had decided exactly how this day was going to go. The three merchants, Cord, Hellaway, and Draven, sat on the complainant's bench opposite. Hellaway, who was a broad, red-faced man with the look of someone who had recently slept poorly, would not look at Beulah. The council chair was an elderly woman named Magistrate Fenn, who had the pointed, precise quality of someone who had heard a great deal of nonsense in her life, and had stopped suffering it at some point in the previous decade. She read the complaint aloud. It was, as Beulah had said, not legitimate on its face. The claim that an itinerant service provider working below the guild threshold had operated illegally was based on a technicality so thin it was nearly transparent. But Cord made his argument smoothly, and Draven cited a statute from 30 years ago that had been superseded but was not widely known to have been superseded, and Hellaway spoke loudly about the importance of the guild system and the protection of established merchants, and from the benches behind them came the murmuring support of people who had their business tied up with the three families. Then the council chair turned to Beulah. "Respondent," she said, "you may present your position." Beulah stood. She placed her papers on the bench in front of her and looked at the council chair, and then she turned and looked at the room. All of it. The council members, the merchants, the people standing at the back, the curious and the hostile and the merely bored. She looked at all of them with those amber eyes, and the room went quiet. "What I am going to demonstrate," she said, in a voice that carried cleanly in the stone room, "is three things. First, that my operating certificate and letter of reference are entirely sufficient under current law for the service I provide, because the guild threshold was amended 11 years ago by the Ashgate Commercial Compact, a document I have copies of here. Second, that my service has operated transparently, with documented contracts and documented outcomes, and that not a single client has filed a complaint against my work, as opposed to 3 of my competing firms, which have between them 7 documented client disputes in the past 4 years. Third, that the complaint before this council was filed the same week I declined to sell my client list to a factor aligned with the Cord family, which I will demonstrate through the correspondence. She paused. Hellaway's face had gone from red to an interesting maroon. I also want to note, she said, that one of the complainant parties sent 2 men to this inn last night with the intent to prevent my attendance here this morning. I have a licensed guild witness who was present and can testify to this. I believe the council may wish to consider that fact when weighing the motivation behind this complaint. The room did not exactly erupt, but it moved. The particular rustle and murmur of a crowd that has been expecting a story and has just gotten a much better one than they anticipated. Magistrate Fenn looked at Hellaway. "Is this true?" she said. "Absolutely not," Hellaway said, and then his hired men were not there, so there was no one to contradict him immediately, and he almost got away with it, except that Benjamin stepped forward from the back of the room. "It is true," he said. "My name is Benjamin Chandler, Guild License number 441 under the Moorland Hunters and Trackers Guild, and I can testify that I witnessed 2 men attempting entry to the respondent's quarters last night who identified their employer as the Hellaway firm." He held up the license card. "I am prepared to make a sworn account." Magistrate Fenn looked at the license, looked at Hellaway. The room, which had been murmuring, went completely quiet. Hellaway stood up. He had the look of a man watching the ground approach him from a great height. "This is a coordinated distortion. Sit down, Merchant Hellaway," Magistrate Fenn said, and there was something in her voice like a door closing on a very cold room. He sat. She turned back to Beulah. "Continue," she said. Beulah continued. She presented each piece of documentation with the precision of someone who had spent the night before organizing it by candlelight with a bounty hunter who cared about getting it right. And by the time she was finished, the Guild Threshold Amendment was in evidence. The superseded statute had been identified and dismissed. The client history was in the record, and the correspondence regarding the refused sale of her client list was on the council table. She sat down, laid her hands flat on the papers, and waited. Magistrate Fenn conferred with 2 council members for 5 minutes. It felt like an hour. Benjamin watched from the back, watching Beulah's back, her shoulders, the stillness in her spine that was not tension but absolute controlled readiness. The magistrate straightened. "The complaint is dismissed," she said. "The respondent's operating certificate and letter of reference are sufficient under current law. The council will note for the record that the filing of a complaint motivated by competitive business interests rather than genuine legal standing is considered an abuse of this process. The Hellaway firm will face a separate inquiry into the events of last night." She looked at the merchants. "The hearing is closed." The room erupted then. Not in the dangerous way, in the surprised way, the way of people who came expecting the powerful to win and got something different. Several of the people in the back were already talking quickly to each other. 2 market farmers Benjamin recognized from the stalls were grinning openly. Someone in the crowd was applauding, and then several others were, and the sound of it bounced off the stone ceiling. Beulah gathered her papers. She did it with the same measured calm. She was not performing relief, because she had not let herself feel fear, and she was not performing triumph, because she was not that kind of woman. She was just finishing one task and preparing for the next. But when she turned from the bench and saw Benjamin at the back of the room, something crossed her face, open and warm and entirely unguarded, there for half a second and then composed again. But he saw it and it hit him like the sun coming out. He went to her, not through the crowd around the edge, where there was space. They met near the door, and he did not touch her because they were in public and she had said she would not have him manage her encounters, but he looked at her very directly and said, "The superseded statute was the turning point." "The correspondence was the turning point," she said. "The statute was just clearing the ground," but her voice was warm. "You did not announce yourself until the right moment. I was waiting to see if you needed it. "You were reading the room," she said. "You were good at it." "You were extraordinary," he said, and meant it so flatly and plainly that she blinked. Outside in the market square, the morning was bright and windy, and the merchants were filing out behind them with the chastened look of people who had overplayed a hand, and the market was doing its morning noise, and Dunport was going on around them as though the world had not, in fact, shifted on its axis slightly, but it had. She stopped at the edge of the square and turned to him. "Last night," she said. "Yes," he said. "I did not do that carelessly," she said. "I want you to know that I do not do that carelessly." "I know," he said. "Neither do I." She looked at him for a long moment. The market wind moved her dark hair. "I have not had a person in a long time," she said, "who I wanted to keep." He felt that statement land all the way through him. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "Not unless you send me." "I am not going to send you," she said. He reached over and took her hand, not hidden, not subtle, in the middle of the market square where the Dunport people walked past, and some of them looked and some of them looked away. And he held it, and she held his, and they stood like that in the open air. And it was the most significant thing he had done in 4 years. What came next was 10 days in Dunport, while the Hellaway inquiry ground forward and Beulah was required to remain available as a witness. They were not difficult days. They moved her things into his room on the second day, practically and without ceremony, because there was no longer any point in pretending the arrangement was otherwise, and the innkeeper Merritt accepted this with the absolute incurious pragmatism she brought to everything. They worked during the days. He picked up a local contract, recovering a horse that had been taken from a stable in disputed circumstances, which was simpler than it sounded and paid adequately. She met with 3 of her moorland clients who had come to Dunport specifically to say they had heard about the council hearing and were pleased with the outcome, and one of them referred her to a new client on the eastern slope. In the evenings, they came back to each other in the easy way of 2 people who have stopped needing to be careful, and he learned things about her that the road had not offered. That she read voraciously whenever she had access to books, and was frustrated by how few circulated into the moorland districts. That she had a sharp, dry wit that she deployed precisely and with impeccable timing. That she made her tea far too strong and drank it without apology. That she had a scar on her left shoulder from a hunting accident in the Clan lands when she was 19 that had left her with a slight impairment in the shoulder. She had quietly spent 3 years correcting with exercise and use. That she was afraid of very few things, but that deep water made her careful in a way that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. That she touched him with a particularity that made him feel, for the first time in a very long time, like a specific person rather than a general one. She would put her hand against his back when she passed behind him, or trace the line of his jaw with her thumb in the morning light when they woke, or sit against his shoulder in the evening with her book and his arm around her as though this were the most natural arrangement in the world, and every single time she did, he felt it with the freshness of the first time. He told her things he had not told anyone in years. About the merchant house that had paid him badly and used him well and never once considered whether he had ambitions of his own. About the woman in Ashgate 2 years ago who had been kind and pretty and entirely uninterested in a man who could not offer stability which had been fair. About how the road had started as a practical solution and become, somewhere in the 4 years, just his life. "Do you miss having a fixed place?" she asked one evening. They were on the inn's upper landing, where there was a narrow bench and a view of the valley. It was past dark and the stars were out, and she was leaning against his arm with her feet tucked up. "I used to think I did not," he said. "Now I am not sure." He glanced at her. "Do you?" "The croft was good," she said. "Garrett made it good." After she paused, choosing. "After it was just a structure. The fixed place is not the place, I think. It is the person you share it with." He thought about this. He thought about the Dunfell moor and the gray mist and the flat crack of a rope landing around a running horse and a woman looking down at him with amber eyes and the unhurried assessment of someone deciding what to think of him. He thought about sable settling under her voice. He thought about candles burning down over shared papers and a hallway at midnight and the whole world narrowing to a hand on his chest and a question asked without words. "I would like a fixed place," he said, "if the right person were in it." She turned her face up to look at him. He looked back at her. The valley stars moved above them. "Is that something you are saying in a general way," she said, "or in a specific way?" "Very specific," he said. She was quiet for a long time, not reluctant, processing. He had learned that she did not speak until she was sure of what she was saying and that this was not hesitation but respect for the weight of words. "I need to tell you something," she said at last. "Tell me." "There are people looking for me." She said it to the valley, not to him. "From before, from when I was with Garrad, his family, the eldest brother particularly. He never accepted the marriage, and he never accepted losing the holding, and he has been looking for me for 2 years. Not to hurt me, necessarily. To take me to a lord's arbitration and have the marriage declared invalid under human clan law because if he succeeds, Garrad's assets pass through the original family line and Garrad had more than the croft. There was a merchant's bond that named me as surviving spouse." Benjamin absorbed this carefully. "How much is the bond worth?" 60 marks. A significant sum, enough to motivate a sustained search, and the brother thinks he can invalidate the marriage. He has a lawyer who thinks he found a registration gap. There was a delay in filing the marriage record. We were on the western side of the clan boundary at the time, and the records officer was absent. It was filed 6 weeks late. The brother argues that makes it void. Her voice was level, but he felt the tension in her shoulder against his. "It is not a strong argument. But it is an argument, and if he gets me into a local arbitration before a magistrate who would prefer to rule in his favor, he might not need a strong argument," Benjamin said. "Exactly," he thought. "Have you been running from this?" "Moving," she said. "There is a difference." "Yes," he said. "There is." He turned toward her, bringing her face level with his. "The Dunport magistrate already has your name in her record as a respondent who won. That is a legal precedent in your favor in this jurisdiction, and Magistrate Fenn does not seem like someone who rules based on preference." "No," she said, "she does not." "Is the brother close?" she considered. "His agent was in Ashgate when I was last there. That was 6 weeks ago." "Then he knows you were in Ashgate. He may know you came east." He looked at her. "Beulah. You need to stop moving and fight this properly, in a jurisdiction where you already have standing. Here. Now. While Magistrate Fenn is already familiar with you and the Hellaway decision is in the record and shows you operate honestly." "I know," she said very quietly. "I have known that for a year. She stopped. "You did not want to be pinned down and vulnerable," he said. "Yes. You do not have to be either of those things," he said. "Not alone." He took her hand. "I have a guild license and I know how to do research. What documentation do you have of the marriage?" She looked at him for a long moment and he felt her making a decision that went deeper than just the legal strategy, a decision about what was safe to trust and who was worth trusting it to. "Everything," she said. "I have everything, all the original papers. I never traveled without them." "Then let us fight it here," he said. "Let the brother come. And let us be ready." The brother came. His name was Tomas Garrad, the dead man's family name, the name Beulah had given up when she left the holding. And he arrived in Dunport 12 days after the council hearing, with a lawyer named Spate and 3 large cousins who stood behind him with the specific posture of men who were aware that their size was their argument. Benjamin was at the guild office when Tomas arrived, and he heard about it from Merritt, who had the information 10 minutes after it happened, because Merritt was the kind of innkeeper who knew everything. He found Beulah in their room, standing at the window, watching the market square below where Tomas and his party had gone into the tavern. "He got here faster than I expected," she said. "He was already coming," Benjamin said. "The hearing drew attention. Someone told someone. He came to stand beside her. Below the square was ordinary pigeon stalls, the blacksmith's hammer in the distance." "What do you want to do?" She turned from the window. Her face was hard and composed, and something underneath that hardness was very tired. "I want to end this," she said. "I have been moving for 2 years. I am done moving." "Good," he said. "Then let us go see Magistrate Fenn." Magistrate Fenn received them in her office, which was a small, crowded room full of law books and the smell of old wax, and she listened to the situation with her sharp, pointed attention fully engaged. The marriage was registered late due to a records officer absence at the western boundary, she said, when they had laid it out. That is a documented circumstance. Under the Ashgate Commercial Compact, which you cited effectively in the previous hearing, a registration delay due to administrative absence is explicitly protected. The marriage stands. She looked at Beulah. The question is whether you want a formal ruling here to end this, or whether you intend to keep moving. "I want a formal ruling," Beulah said. "Then I will hear the matter day after tomorrow. Notify the Garrett party that they have 24 hours to appear or forfeit the complaint." Benjamin delivered the notification himself, which meant walking into the tavern where Tomas and the cousins were drinking and putting the formal summons on the table in front of them. Tomas was a hard-faced man of 50, with the look of someone who had decided something long ago and had not revisited the decision. He looked at the summons, then at Benjamin. "You are the hunter," he said. "You are her man." "I am Benjamin Chandler," Benjamin said. "I am a licensed guild member and a witness to the marriage documentation. And in 2 days you are going to lose this in front of Magistrate Fenn, who has already had cause to observe that I tell the truth, and then you are going to go home and this is going to be over." He picked up his copy of the summons. "I would strongly advise you to talk to your lawyer tonight and then make a sensible decision." He walked out. His hands were steady. His heart was not entirely, but that was fine. The night before the hearing, Tomas's lawyer Spate came to the inn and asked to speak with Beulah. Benjamin let her take the meeting without him because she had said she would handle her own encounters, and he sat on the landing stairs and listened to the pigeons settle on the inn's roof and waited. She was back in 20 minutes. "He wants to settle," she said, "without the hearing." "What terms?" "He concedes the marriage. He concedes the bond." She sat down beside him on the stairs. "In return, I agree not to pursue any claim on the original Croft holding." "Were you going to pursue a claim on the Croft?" "No, I left that behind 5 years ago." Her voice was even. "It was a face-saving offer. They know they cannot win the hearing. Do you want to accept it?" She looked at her hands in her lap. "It means it is over," she said. "The marriage is real and the bond is mine and there is no more running." "Yes," he said, "that is what it means." She was quiet for a while. He waited. "I am going to accept it," she said, "but I want it written properly and signed before Magistrate Fenn as a witness, not just between Spate and me." "That is exactly right," he said. "We do it in front of Fenn." She turned to look at him. Her amber eyes in the dim landing light were a little brighter than usual, and he thought she might be more affected by this than she was allowing her face to show, which was her right, and he did not name it. "Thank you," she said. "For all of this, for coming with me to Fenn, for going to Tomas." For she stopped. "I do not always say things as well as I mean them." "You say things exactly as well as you mean them," he said. "That is one of my favorite things about you." She reached over and put her hand against the side of his face, not the back of his neck this time, the claiming gesture, but the full palm of her scarred hand against his jaw, and held it there, and he covered her hand with his own and they sat on the inn stairs in the quiet dark. "After all this is finished," she said, "I want to stop moving." "Tell me what that looks like," he said. "I want a fixed place," she said. "East of the Dunfell, where I know the land and the land knows me. I have enough from the business and the bond will give me more. I want to keep the assessment work, but I want a base to come back to." He was listening with his whole body. "I want you to come back to it with me," she said. "I know your work is on the road. I know you have contracts. But the road comes through the Dunfell and Dunport is on it, and I have—" She paused. "I have been alone a long time, Benjamin. I do not want to be alone anymore." He turned his face into her palm and kissed the scar on her hand. He felt her breath change. "I have been alone a long time too," he said against her hand. and I want to be done with it." He lifted his head. "I am not giving up the work, but I can take contracts that keep me in this region, and I can be the kind of man who comes home to a place that is worth coming home to." He met her eyes. "If you will let me." She looked at him with everything she had, all of it at once, the strength and the grief and the stubbornness and the warmth she kept so carefully, and it settled on him like sunlight on good stone. "I will let you," she said. The settlement was signed before Magistrate Finn 2 days later, in the same stone room where the council had met, with Tomas and Spate on one side and Beulah and Benjamin on the other, and the magistrate's sharp eyes on all of them. Tomas signed with the look of a man who was not happy but who had done his math and come to terms with the result. Spate signed efficiently and without looking up. Magistrate Finn signed as witness and put her seal on it, and that was the end of 2 years of looking over her shoulder. Outside on the market square in the morning light, Beulah held the sealed document in both hands and looked at it for a moment. Just a moment. Then she put it in her satchel with the same careful precision she put everything in her satchel, and she closed the buckle, and she was done. Benjamin was standing a step back, giving her the moment. She turned and looked at him, and what was in her face then was something he had not seen there before, not the composure or the watchfulness or the dry humor or even the warmth she had been letting him see more of. This was simpler than all of that. This was relief. This was a woman putting down a weight she had been carrying alone for a very long time, and it made her look younger and more open and entirely herself in a way that reached directly into his chest and took hold of something. "Done," she said. "Done," he agreed. She walked the 2 steps between them and put her arms around him, just that, no ceremony, no particular drama. She simply walked into him and held on, and he wrapped his arms around her back and held her in the middle of the market square in the morning light, and neither of them moved for a long time. Around them, Dunport went on being Dunport. The pigeons argued. The blacksmith hammered. 2 women at the well glanced over and made what they would of it, and neither of them cared even slightly. They found the holding 6 weeks later. It was east of the Dunfell, as she had said she wanted, on a long stretch of moorland above a river bend where the land was firm and the grass ran green through the heather in spring. There was a stone cottage, low-roofed and solid, that had been standing for at least 200 years and would stand for 200 more, with a barn attached that needed a new roof beam and a year's worth of clearing but was structurally honest. There was a well. There were 2 lower fields that had been worked before and could be worked again. The couple who had held it were moving south to be near their daughter and were asking a fair price. The bond money was more than enough, with a good sum left over. Beulah walked the holding twice around the perimeter before she said anything, and Benjamin walked with her, watching her read the land the way she read wool, assessing, taking measurements he could not see, arriving at a judgment. She stopped at the far corner of the upper field, where the moorland opened out to the east and the standing stones were visible in a long line across the ridge. The mist was low on the hills, the way it always was in the Dunfell country, and the stones rose out of it in that ancient, indifferent way. "This is the place," she said. "Yes," he said. She turned to him. The wind brought her hair across her face and she pushed it back this time, tucking it behind one ear, and it was such a small, ordinary gesture, so entirely unguarded, that he fell in love with her all over again in that specific second. "I want to make an offer," she said. "Today. Then we go back and make an offer today." They made the offer that afternoon. The selling couple, an old farmer named Hewan and his wife Nesta, shook hands on it by evening, and Nesta made them supper without being asked, a lamb stew that was better than anything the Tubridge had served, and they ate at the old farm table that was staying with the holding, and Hewan told them the history of the stone cottage, and Beulah asked questions that showed she already thought of the place as hers, and Benjamin listened, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 4 years. Walking back to the inn where they were staying in the nearest small town, 3 miles on a dark road, she took his hand without preamble and kept it. "In the Western clans," she said, When a woman brings a man to stand on the land she is choosing, it is considered the first step of claiming a shared life. You told me I was already claimed, he said. You are, she said. I am being thorough. He laughed that laugh, still rough from disuse but less so now, warming with repetition. She smiled at the sound of it and squeezed his hand. I want to do a proper orc rite, she said, not a human ceremony. Not the paperwork that Gared's family used to cause problems. I want to do it the clan way. She paused. It is not legally binding in Dunport jurisdiction, but it is binding to me, if you are willing. He thought about the breath places and the standing stones and the way she had looked in the greystone arch with the moorland below her. Tell me what it involves, he said. Fire, an exchange of something made by each party's hands, a declaration spoken to the open sky. She glanced at him. That is the short form. The long form involves 3 days of ritual that I do not expect to perform without a clan elder present. What would I make, he said. With my hands. Whatever you can make that carries meaning, she thought. You work with rope and leads, you track things. What do you make with those skills? He thought about it for a mile. Then he said, I can make a cord knot, a hunter's knot. We use them for marks of partnership in the guild. 2 cords interlaced so they hold without being bound. She was quiet for a few steps. That is right, she said. That is exactly right. The rite happened 2 weeks later on the ridge above the holding at the Standing Stones on a night that was cold and clear and full of stars. They built a small fire between 2 of the stones and she spoke in the Western tongue first, a long formal sentence that she then translated for him. That she took this man to stand beside her, to share her land and her fire and her name, of her own will and not another's, as a free woman. He spoke in plain common because that was his only tongue, and said that he took this woman to stand beside him, to share all that he had and all that he was, and that he would not stop choosing her. He said it to the open sky because she had asked him to, and his voice was steadier than he expected. They exchanged their made things. Her gift to him was a length of braided rope, short enough to carry in a coat pocket, made from moorland grass, and a strip of her leather vest, tight and intricate and strong. His gift to her was the hunter's knot, 2 cords of different color woven together in the guild style, which held without being bound, which could be taken apart in theory, but which no one who made it properly ever did. She put the knot on over her head and wore it against her chest. He put the rope in his coat pocket where the carry papers usually went. She kissed him at the Standing Stones in the dark, with the fire low between them and the moorland stars overhead, and it was as different from the hallway kiss as the holding was from the road, deeper and calmer and rooted. The kiss of 2 people who knew each other now and had chosen each other anyway. Claimed, she said against his mouth. Thoroughly, he agreed. The roof beam on the barn went in before the rains came in earnest, which was a near thing and required Benjamin on a ladder in a strong wind while Beulah stood below holding the guide rope and giving him instructions he did not entirely need but appreciated. He had turned out to be useful with his hands in ways his previous life had not fully tested. He could work wood and leather and stone, all the skills picked up on the road repurposed now for something that stayed put. She ran the assessment business from the holding and the surrounding area, and her reputation in the district only grew after the Dunport hearing. Farmers sought her out who had not done so before, because the hearing had made her known in a way the quiet years of good work had not. She hired a young man named Pell from the nearest town to handle transport of samples during her busiest season, and she trained him carefully and paid him fairly, and he turned out to be reliable. Benjamin took contracts that kept him within 2 days of the holding. He was selective in a way he had not been before, not out of laziness, but because he had someone to come home to, and he made decisions accordingly. He turned down 3 contracts that would have taken him west of the clan border, not because he was afraid of the distance, but because they were not worth it. He came home from each job to a cottage that had candlelight in it and a fire laid, and a woman who had always known roughly when he would arrive, because She had learned to read the roads the same way she read the land, and who greeted him not with performance but with simple reality, her hand against his face, her presence solid and warm, the ease of two people who are used to each other and have not yet exhausted what being used to each other means. He came home once with a cut across his forearm, badly bandaged by his own hand, and she cleaned it and rebandaged it properly without excessive commentary, but with a thoroughness that left him in no doubt that she would prefer he avoid further arm cuts. He came home once with a stray dog who had been following him for 2 days and showed no sign of stopping, and she looked at the dog for approximately 4 seconds and then went inside and came back with a bowl of water, which settled the matter. The dog was named Mist, for the Dunfell, and took a strong position on whose end of the bed was whose. In the winter, when the assessment work slowed and the contracts were fewer, they had time in the cottage and they used it well. She read the books he brought back from Dunport, and he learned a handful of words in the Western tongue, and they argued amicably about the best route across the Dunfell and agreed on nothing, but enjoyed the argument. She told him more about the clan lands, about growing up in the Western Marches, about her mother who had been a fighter and her father who had been a healer, and the combination of those two inheritances in her own nature. He told her more about himself than he had told anyone, the years of being invisible, of being the reliable one who was not quite seen, of the long road that had led to the moor and the mist and a rope catching a running horse and a pair of amber eyes looking him over slowly. "What did you see?" he asked her once. "When you looked at me that first time, lying in the heather with my knee gone sideways." She considered. She was reading by the fire and she lowered the book and thought about it seriously, which was how she answered everything worth answering. "A man who was embarrassed about being helped," she said, "but was going to accept it anyway, which means he is practical. Who took his own measure clearly, he knew the knee was strained, not broken. Who said thank you and meant it," she looked at him, "and who watched me walk to his horse with the specific expression of a man who is seeing something that is reorganizing his assumptions." "That is very accurate," he said. "I am good at assessments," she said, with that dry composure, and went back to her book. He watched her read for a while, in the firelight, with mist against her feet and the winter wind working at the roof and the kettle on the hook, and he thought about all the roads he had traveled, and all the lonely suppers and all the inns that were clean enough and warm enough but not quite right, and he thought that the particular quality of rightness in this room at this moment was something he would not have known how to want before, because he had not known it existed. She looked up from the book, caught him watching. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I am just looking at you." She held his gaze. Her amber eyes in the firelight were warm and direct and entirely clear, the same eyes that had looked him over slowly in the moorland and found something worth keeping. "I like when you do that," she said quietly. He went and sat beside her on the bench by the fire. She leaned against him without putting the book down, settling in with the ease of long practice, and Mist rearranged himself across their feet, and the fire moved, and outside the Dunfell mist was doing what it always did, moving through the standing stones in the dark, breathing in and never quite breathing all the way out. He thought about fixed places and the people in them. About how a woman with a rope and a steady eye and a voice that gentled running horses had looked at an ordinary man lying in the heather and decided with characteristic thoroughness that he was worth keeping. He thought about how she had said it, "I have been alone a long time. I do not want to be alone anymore." Neither did he. Not anymore. Not ever again if he could help it. The hunter's knot rested against her chest under her shirt. The braided cord was in his coat on the hook by the door. Outside, Sable was in the barn with a new roof beam, well fed and unbothered by the wind. The holding was theirs, sealed and legal and alive. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. She turned a page. In the spring, when the moorland woke up and the Dunfell mist pulled back to the high ground and the new grass came through the heather in green rushes, she would walk her assessment rounds again, and he would ride out on the first of the season's contracts. The road would be what it had always been, long and mist-hazed and full of standing stones and uncertain footing. But now it ended somewhere specific. Now there was a light in the window and a fire laid, and a woman who knew when to expect him. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer overlooked. He was no longer the general kind of man that roads eat up and spit out without noticing. He was the specific man that Beulah Rageborn had looked at slowly, assessed with precision, and chosen. She had done it the way she did everything, deliberately, without apology, with the full weight of who she was behind it. And she kept choosing him. That was the thing. Not just once, not just in the hallway at midnight or at the standing stones in the firelight. Every morning when she put her hand against his face. Every evening when she leaned against his shoulder. Every time she met his eyes across a room, and something passed between them that needed no translation. She kept choosing him again and again, and he kept choosing her, and the stone cottage held them both, and the moorland winter turned toward spring, and that was enough. That was everything. That was exactly right. Outside the Dunfell breathed, and the standing stones stood, and somewhere in the mist a stone chat called and was answered, and the world went on in its rugged and unhurried way, holding this small bright thing inside it without knowing it was doing so, as the world always does.